Monday, November 24th, 2025, the daily podcast from the New York Times posted an episode titled The Autism Diagnosis Problem. The episode covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes, starting with the history and evolution of the autism diagnosis, transitioned quickly into the rise of the neurodiversity movement over the last decade, and then concluded with a discussion around the complexity and challenges related to supporting the broad spectrum of people and families that make up the autism community. If you haven't heard the episode yet, I highly suggest you check it out. As we record this, it's November 26th, or Thanksgiving Eve. Over the last 2 days, the episode has spurred a really active conversation, especially among our team here at NeuroTalent Works. So we decided that we should record the conversation and share it with everyone. With that, I am Matt Ledger, Director of Strategy and Growth here at NeuroTalent Works. I'm joined by Jessica Lee, our co-founder, executive director, and fearless leader. Jessica, thanks for organizing this so quickly. And let's just jump right into it because I know we've got a lot to talk about. So first, Jessica, what was your gut reaction when you first heard the episode?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we always appreciate when dialogue is being had about autism and neurodiversity, because for so long it wasn't something that I think people felt like they were able to talk about. So first, I want to start with that we are glad that dialogue and conversation is happening. At the same time, the gut reaction I had and many of us had was disappointment. I think, especially from people who are leading this work, many of us who are neurodivergent or who have loved ones, friends, and family that are neurodivergent, we didn't feel like it quite captured the whole picture, and highlighting and breaking down the complexity of the problem that was brought up, or as they call the diagnosis problem. So, diagnosis is the start, but then looking at it over a whole lifetime is what we want to have a broader conversation and to deepen the conversation towards that.
Definitely agree. And, my first gut reaction of, I'm sitting there doing dishes, looking for a podcast to listen to, and I see the title on the daily. I listen to the daily, uh, and I see the title, The Autism Diagnosis Problem.
Hmm.
So immediately my brain is like, hold on a second. And, I started out listening to it. And I was actually pleasantly surprised at the start. I actually felt like they were actually doing a really good job talking about the history and evolution of the autism diagnosis, the complexity of it, right? They talked about the rise of the neurodiversity movement and how that's brought greater awareness and acceptance of neurodivergence and autism specifically. And I was like, this is great. I started out like thinking that we're going in a positive direction, and then the conversation really shifted towards a direction that I thought derailed it from the direction it was going.
Yes.
And they talked about, you know, the issue of the diagnosis itself rather than, which I know we'll talk about, like the broader systemic issues related to this. And so I felt like we started good, but then when we started getting into the solutions about what we do about this quote unquote diagnosis problem, I felt like the conversation felt really short. And there's only so much you can talk about in a short period like they did.
Mhm.
But that was my initial gut reaction of like, oh, we were going in the right direction and just
Yeah.
fell short on solutions.
Yeah. Same.
So
I was exactly with you for the first half. And at the end, I was like, wait, that's it? There's more. We didn't get to the meat of it. So I'm right there with you. And I guess we can bring that second half here.
yeah, absolutely. And so I want to start on a positive note though. What did you like about the episode? What do you want to emphasize coming out of it?
Yeah, a lot of what you were saying of giving the history of diagnoses in the country and what was brought up, the exact neurodiversity movement of we're moving away from finding a cure to acceptance. And Kathy, who's the guest psychologist, had brought up, she had said things that really highlighted how we should be thinking about it. She was saying that where positive change has been had with all of her work in the diagnostic system is that we started thinking about how do we shift the environment and provide tools for communication. She was talking about children in schools. And I wanted to double click on that because that's exactly where and how we should be thinking about a diagnosis and the support system of that's needed. And they did in the episode highlight where resources have been limited. They emphasized two things in schools, in the classroom systems, and not being meeting all children, and especially autistic and neurodivergent children, and the lack of research and the funding that has not been poured in. And those are two very core challenges that they highlighted, and I'm glad they did. What we would want to add to that is employment, looking at the full life cycle of any individual, not just the first 18 years, but all of the 50, 60 years thereafter. And so both of those are still true. We have a lack of support and more needs in schools. We have a lack of research and a real need for that. We also have an 80% unemployment rate that needs to be addressed.
That's great. And the other thing I think I liked about it was, we've talked about this a lot kind of off camera, but this idea that like right now there's so much misinformation,
Mhm.
disinformation going around this issue, and it's become a political hotbed problem, which we all know how anything that becomes a political hotbed in America, what type of direction that tends to take. And I feel like it's important to like actually educate people about autism and where it comes from
Yeah.
and how the diagnosis has evolved, right? Which is, as we all know, the major driver behind the shift in numbers of how many among us have autism. It's due to this diagnosis
Hmm.
issue. So I thought it was really, really important that they highlighted that and focused on
Yeah.
that because I think that's the core of all other misinformation and disinformation that's
Yes.
coming out right now
Right.
around. So I thought that was really great.
Yeah.
Now, we started out talking about the gut reaction being a relatively negative one, though. Where did they really fall short? What was missing from the conversation that you wish was included so that it really would have done service to this issue?
Yeah. First, I think, always there was that question that was asked of who gets to speak for the community. And I saw a lot of the comments on the episode also, which always we need to center the voice and experiences of autistic individuals, and especially adults who have their lived experience through school and into adulthood. And I did appreciate that they brought in some self advocates and voices. But I think doing more of that would have revealed some of the other shortcomings. First, I think we want people to walk away with um, an like we want parents and people to walk away with knowing that you should get a diagnosis. The fear of this episode was we didn't want people to feel like if you get a diagnosis that you're taking away from someone else, from families that have higher needs. That's not the problem here that is present. What we need is supports for all people that fall into um any portion of the spectrum, that those that have higher needs need support in the same way that those that have less needs do. And so I really think what we want to make sure parents and so many parents that we meet of even young children and my friends of mine that are questioning, should I get a diagnosis? And there's worries about it. And so that's where I think one area of where they fell short of making it sound like if you do, you're not, we're taking away resources from other people. And that's not true. Um, the second thing, and Matt, you brought this up really well and stated it, so please add to this, but um, it's true. A diagnosis is complicated, and the support systems that are in place are adding to that complication. That is what makes it so complex. It's not just that a diagnosis is complicated, it's that the systems that we have for getting support are also complicated. And that just compounds the complexity. Um, and so, yeah, I think that and then of course, the last thing of what we're also missing from the conversation, which is what our organization focuses on, is the employment conversation. It was brought up very briefly, and I appreciated that they highlighted that with some employers seeing the strengths of, the perspective that autistic and neurodivergent individuals bring, and that is what they and others have called a superpower, these gifts, that you want directness, that you want people who see the world differently to help design your products, and to represent your customers. Um, but what's missing is that statistic of 80% of people with autism are unemployed and 50% that are underemployed. They're not being fully leveraged for their gifts and their strengths. And I fear that a conversation and a podcast episode that calls autism a problem only perpetuates that 80% unemployment rate, because it's a perception change that's needed, and a shift, to remove stigmas and to actually understand neurodivergence at a cognitive level, because only then can you see those strengths, and also acknowledge the challenges and be able to address them without shame, which is what we do with our employer partners. Um, yeah, please
Yeah.
add.
Yeah, adding to those last two pieces around the kind of complexity of the systems and supports around this population is a lot of the systems in place to support. In the case of this episode, they're talking about kids mostly with autism. The systems around the kids are very siloed, complex for no good reason, right?
Mm,
There's private health providers, there's the schools, there's the nonprofits and the support groups that form around this, and they all kind of operate in their own areas, right? If you think about like special needs education, you put kids in an IEP program, which for a lot of kids is necessary, but sometimes we put kids like off to the side, right?
yeah.
Rather than integrate them within our schools and within the support systems that are necessary. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know that that's a good thing that we kind of push them off to the side. Yes, there's dedicated resources for them over there, but that's kind of like a siloed approach to how we bring people in this community into the broader population, right? So
Yeah.
that's the thing. The other thing is, you know, the system has failed to really scale to support the need, right? The
Mm,
episode talked a lot about how there's been this fight now over of the existing resources we have, who should get them. And
right.
that's not the right question. It's how do we scale the system to support everybody,
Yeah.
right? That's where I feel like the conversation fell short for me was I understand they were just talking about the problem that currently exists, that there's this fight over resources, but the conversation should have shifted in this episode to talking about how do we scale those systems
Yeah.
effectively. Uh,
Yeah.
and then on the kind of missing employment piece, the other thing I would say, just in adulthood, employment or unemployment, like regardless, is as soon as kids leave school, there's effectively no resources for them anymore,
Right.
right? We call it the support cliff.
Yeah.
Uh, the moment you become, an 18-year-old, or you graduate from high school and you enter the workforce or you enter just the real world, there's nothing for you. And
Hmm.
so we've completely abandoned everyone in the autistic community the moment they become an adult. And autism doesn't go away when you become an adult. Like it stays
No.
forever. Uh,
Yeah.
some people need more supports than others. And there's absolutely nothing for anybody. So the conversation missed that whole other side of the equation of, yeah, there's problems at the, K through 12 level, but
Hmm.
there's just as big of, if not bigger problems after people leave.
Yeah.
Uh, there's people who get diagnoses when they're 30, 40, 50 years old.
Yes.
They never got resources as kids, and then they don't find out until their midlife.
Right.
Um, sure. That's a
Yeah.
problem that was missed.
Yeah. And what we continue to hear a lot of are adults, parents who are getting diagnoses for their children and then are now then thinking, oh my gosh, these were challenges I had when I was a child. Maybe I'm also autistic or neurodivergent. And like you said, these late diagnoses that are happening. Um, and yeah, just this real need to redesign and rethink the entire system from a human-centered way. For a moment for teachers, like I have friends and family who are in the education system and where they're sharing with me, like it's great that integration is happening. We are seeing more um, autistic and neurodivergent children in mainstream classes, which we're all for. But the broken system is that the teachers don't have the training on how to support those individualized needs or even like other aides in the classroom who can be supportive, and some occupational therapists that are brought in, but it's not adequate. It's not enough. And then you think of employment, like you're saying, you're 18 years old now, you're expected to be independent, but you didn't get all the resources you needed in schools, and now you're really not getting any to get a job. And we could go on and on about the barriers and the broken systems and with employers, but the biggest being the interview process and that it's designed for very fluent social people who communicate verbally in a particular way to convince you to be employed. Um, and that's the systems on the employer side need to also be enhanced and reconsidered.
Yeah, that's really just scratching the surface
Yeah.
of the systemic issues there. Um, so we just started to allude to the types of things we should start changing. So
Mhm.
the episode talked a lot about the problems with serving this population effectively. I didn't hear much in terms of solutions.
Mhm.
There was some talk about some ideas at a high level, but there wasn't really anything for me that felt like they were really getting at the
Right.
root cause and the types of things that need to change. So,
Mhm.
what are some things we need to do as a nation to help support this population more effectively?
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways to look at this or how we should consider it. There's a systems level of solutions that I think we um, should consider and ought to be moving towards. And then there's also individual level solutions for just you and I as everyday people that are in the world. And I'll start there because I think the whole dialogue that has just come to life this year around autism, what we continue to go back to is we need to stop pathologizing in the way that we talk about this, the words we use, our attitude of our hearts as we talk about it, to one that's more humanized. And one of our partners, Brent Orell, from the American Enterprise Institute, where the work we've done together is all about dignity, right? And that in all the work that we lead and all the conversations that we have, we should be thinking, if an autistic person was in the room with me, sitting next to me, having this conversation with me, do they feel seen? Do they feel heard? Are they part of this conversation? Um, and I think that's a real miss that we have, that we are not humanizing how we talk about this, and that every individual in this country deserves a life and to be treated with dignity and to have opportunity. That's what we're all wanting for everybody. And for so often, autistic individuals, people with non-visible disabilities have been invisible. And we really need to do a better job of humanizing. Um, at a systems level, there's policy changes that we absolutely can and need to make. The support cliff that you brought up and we're talking about, that there are so many barriers in employment, not enough services and funding. The vocational rehabilitation system is hard pressed. They want to be able to serve with more quality, but they can't. Their caseloads are just way too large for organizations like us, nonprofits that are trying to bridge this gap, working with employers and working with neurodivergent job candidates. We struggle to get funding. There's not a lot of philanthropic dollars that are supporting disability work. And we can revisit the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, about what workplace accommodations are actually helpful for neurodivergent individuals and to not make that so difficult for people to get, and to put a little more accountability on employers to have training on understanding all minds so that you can adequately support people when they're requesting for accommodations and have that not be something that is so legally um, like complex and the fears around it from a legal standpoint. I think we should be able to want to help all of us do our best work and get what somebody needs to be successful. And then something that I tell in all of our trainings is, I want all of us to walk into the grocery store that we go to every day. And when we see people who may be more severe, more high impacted, because you're noticing that more commonly, that we treat each other with that dignity, that you look that individual in the eye, that you acknowledge and look at their parents in the eye. I think so often we turn away from it because there's shame or we don't know how and we don't want to offend. But really, the thing that's needed most is that we all look to each other and say, we want to support you. We see you. You matter just the same. And you are a whole person. And I think that's where we need to shift the whole conversation and the work.
Agreed. And you and I co-authored, speaking of Brent Durrell and AEI, you and I co-authored a paper approaching a year and a half ago now, actually a little over a year and a half ago now, where we outlined a lot of policy recommendations focused on
Hmm.
the employment side of things. So there's lots that you can kind of reference there as opportunities. But on that note, thinking back on that paper, I mean, we were working on that paper for 16 months end to end, I think it was, and
Hmm.
we ended up having to interview a lot of people who were neurodivergent. We had to interview a lot of people who were managers or corporate
Hmm.
executives who are trying or thinking about how to embrace neurodiversity. And the reason we had to do a lot more of that than we anticipated was there's a dearth of research out there about this population in terms of like supporting adults, supporting neurodivergent minds in the workplace, right? There's really not a lot out there from the kind of adulthood on side
Yes.
of it, right? So we need to be funding research there too, right? Uh,
Hmm.
it's not just about research to find the cause of autism or the cure, right? Because that's still focused on fixing,
Yes.
right? And that's the wrong approach in our mind, right? Our mind
Right.
is this, our view on this is a natural variation in the human mind. There may
Hmm.
be some environmental causes and other things that make some people more susceptible than others, right? And all of that.
Right.
But this is something that needs to be embraced positively as not
Hmm.
something to be fixed, but something to be embraced.
Yeah.
And there's no research or not enough research into understanding how we do that latter piece, right?
Yeah.
Moving towards this idea that this is a population that has value in the world and can do a lot of things if we just put the right systems and supports in place for them.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's where we need to be moving.
Hmm.
Now, last two questions here. In some ways, it's great the discussion around autism and neurodivergence has been elevated to the national stage because it brings more attention to the cause. But the other side of that is that we talked earlier about how this has led to a lot of misinformation, disinformation, politically charged and emotionally charged discussions that are harmful to this population. Um, so in what ways are you seeing the narrative shift positively, and where are things shifting in the wrong direction?
Yeah, I think we've highlighted a lot of where the wrong direction is happening. Um, the pathologizing, putting so much emphasis on finding the causes. Um, and I just think yeah, it's communicating that something is wrong, something needs to be cured. And like they said in the episode, we've made so much progress away from that, and so much more towards the neurodiversity movement. And what we're promoting for dignity and appreciation is where I want to get people to, of having all kinds of minds in our families and in our workplaces. um, so that's the key of the negative of we just need to get away from that. This needs to be fixed. Um, the positive is that it's allowing space for the conversation that you and I are having today and for dialogue to happen. What I would love to see is a real critical look at a redesign of a system that can meet the needs of everybody that does receive a diagnosis of autism spectrum. Um, the episode talks a lot about those with the highest needs. And I want to make clear that we're saying that the people with the highest needs need the support, they need the research, they need the funding and the solutions. And everybody else that's on all levels of the spectrum also need that same support and that same rigor of looking at what is supportive. There was a comment in the chat that I thought, or sorry, in the response to the episode that I want to highlight. And it was an autistic person that said, the needs of so-called quote unquote low support autistic people can be quite simple to meet. With our needs met, we can thrive. With our needs unmet, we are subject to heightened levels of PTSD, all the way to contemplating suicide. And you and I, Matt, we've heard so much about the isolation that people feel, and this is so important to highlight because any unmet need of anybody with support that's needed can have really negative impacts. And so we have to be able to design a system that meets everyone where they are. So I think that's really something that we need to have a conversation about. And the positive here that we're starting to have that dialogue and we are here to have it and to continue the work of fighting this from it's a systemic change that needs to happen and a real redesign of the system.
Agreed. And one other thing that I think has been encouraging to see over the last 10, 12 months has been people coming out talking about their lived experiences more. My
Yeah.
fear early on was that more people would go back into hiding who they were.
Hmm.
And that may be the case for a lot of people that they've decided they're not going to be open about their neurodivergence anymore, given concerns around their safety and all of that. But I've also seen quite a lot of people, maybe those who were quiet before, who
Yeah.
out and said, "Here's my lived experience with this," or "I've got family who have
Yeah.
XYZ condition." A lot of people coming out and trying to ensure that we don't go back into that fear-driven conversation. Uh,
Hmm.
so I've been really encouraged by that, and I encourage everyone listening to keep doing that. As concerning as it might be for many, many reasons, like if you're in a position to speak up, I think now is definitely the most important time
Yeah.
to doing that. So in closing it out, for those listening, whether they are neurodivergent themselves or they are from impacted families or their employers or policymakers, what's one thing you would want them to walk away from this conversation feeling or knowing?
Yeah. I think, first of all, for our neurodiverse community and all parents, caretakers, loved ones of someone who is neurodivergent, just we see you and we are with you. Like what you were just talking about, Matt, of people who are more comfortable sharing their stories now. That like we're here to listen and we're here to advance this work of the systemic changes that are needed to significantly change these outcomes. And so I want the community to walk away knowing like you have advocates and people fighting for you and with you. And I have to give you credit, Matt, for coming up with this name of this episode, which the daily episode name of the Autism Diagnosis Problem. We want to shift and have a conversation of this is as the opportunity of an autism diagnosis. It's not a problem. It's an opportunity to redesign and to really uplift and restore dignity to this community and to have that be how we lead this work. That's the opportunity that this country has right now with the elevation of this dialogue. And we're grateful for that.
No notes. I think that's a perfect note to end on. So we'll close it out there. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know there's so much happening in this world right now, and to have you spend 20 or so odd minutes with us to talk about this has been really valuable. So thanks for being here, and look forward to continuing the conversation more. Jessica, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.